Hello again, everyone. Our live stream will be starting shortly. I would like to thank you all for being up at this time. And we'll be starting shortly. A lot of things happened during this past week that we'll be talking about. So hope you all can join in. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television SBTV. My name is Patrick Vieira, and I'll be your host for this live stream. I know it's nighttime again, wherever you folks are, so I do thank you for being up at this time, wherever you may be. A lot of things going on in the news this week, that's for sure. But if this is your first time to our channel or you have not already done so, please do remember to go ahead and subscribe to our channel and go ahead and click on the bell to be notified on new updates, and do give us a thumbs up if you like what we do. And you can also find us on social media. Our website is www.silverbullion.com.sg. Don't forget the SG. We are in Singapore. How you doing, Lindy? On Facebook, we are Silver Bullion SG. On Twitter, we are at Silver Bullion PL. PL meaning private limited. And once again, if you really do have a face for radio, you can find us on bit.ly, bit.ly/SBTV iTunes and SBTV Spotify. So whichever is your preference, you can also find us there. So again, it was a pretty interesting week that we had, especially with Jay Powell coming out with his comments at the FOMC meetings and letting us know what's going on with the Fed. In case you missed it, I'll go ahead and play a clip of what Jay had to say. And of course, first thing, we run into technical problems, so let's get the clip going.
Good afternoon and welcome. My colleagues and I have one overarching goal: to sustain the economic expansion with a strong job market and stable prices for the benefit of the American people. At the FOMC meeting that concluded today, we maintained our policy interest rate, but made some significant changes to our statement. Since the beginning of the year, we have judged that our current policy stance was broadly appropriate and that we should be patient in assessing the need for any changes. In light of increased uncertainties and muted inflation pressures, we now emphasize that the committee will closely monitor the implications of incoming information for the economic outlook and will act as appropriate to sustain the expansion with a strong labor market and inflation near its 2% objective.
Okay, Jay Powell talking about where the Fed is going to be patient and is going to be helping out with economic expansion, aka being patient, meaning they're going to be listening perhaps to what Donald Trump has to say and just taking a look at the economy. But economic expansion, I think that's the troubling part, where economic expansion basically means keeping the economy going pretty much at all costs, I would say. And with that in mind, I think we are going to be looking at either interest rates that are going to pause, which they have, or interest rates that are going to be going down. We even hear some people saying we're going to be looking at 0% interest rates again. And we hear some guys even saying we're looking at negative interest rates. So I'm curious to see what you all have to say about that. Dave Novitsky, Dr. Faber interview. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, Dr. Faber, he's spot on a lot of times. I mean, timing is rough. It's very hard to give a date, but I think overall, if you just take the fundamentals of what Dr. Faber is saying, I think he's dead on. He's very spot on with what he's saying. The chief, how you doing again? Powell, best Fed chairman in the last 20 years. Well, definitely. Yellen's not hard to beat. I don't think Yellen is hard to beat. Bernanke, he did what he had to do. I think his legacy will be for guys who really know and study the markets, the economies, I think his legacy is going to be he did do what he had to do, and he, in a sense, saved it. And I think with for the other half, me included, I think he should have done some things different. For me, mainly, I think if you were going to give out all that money, I think it should have went into the hands of the people. I mean, if your goal was to stimulate the economy, you don't give it to the bankers. You give it to the people who owe money. They would have been able to do something to pay off their mortgages or whatnot, and that in turn would have went back to the banks, which in turn the banks could have used how they were supposed to have used the money that they got in the first place. So that's that's my opinion on it. But for Yankee, we'll see how his history goes. What is mining cost of silver? I've heard some guys say 14. I've heard some people say as down as 11. So hard to give a definite number on that. Meta Silver, how you doing? Hope things out there are doing great. But the thing with Powell, before Powell even made his statement, there were two guys that nailed it on the head. One of them being Dave Kranzler, where he was looking at is it going to be possible for them to cap gold this time at 13.50 an ounce? Hang on, let me go ahead and pull that up for you. Okay. So Kranzler, he wrote an article about if they're going to be able to cap gold at 1300 this time, considering all the other times gold got close, or 1350, I should say, because all the other times gold got close to 1350, we did see it go back down. So Kranzler wrote this article, Dave Kranzler from Investment Research Products or Dynamics, and what he had to say was, I'll just highlight it here. The rapid rise in gold from 700 to 1900 between the late 2008 and September 2011 was powered by global central bank money printing and big bank bailouts. We know money printing is on the horizon, and we know that Jay Powell is kind of hinting at it. But so are bank bailouts. Again, the curious and highly opaque announcement that Deutsche Bank was going to create a bad bank for its distressed assets, which are losing $500 million annually, suggests that the German government and or ECB is prepared to monetize Deutsche Bank's bad assets. Um, but Kranzler goes on to say that this is just the beginning of what will eventually turn out to be a period of epic money printing and systemic bailouts by central banks in conjunction with their sovereign lapdogs. Only this time, the scale of the operation will dwarf the monetization program that began in 2008. The price of gold more than doubled with ease. Back then, it doubled with ease. And in his opinion, there's no question that the 1350 official price cap will fail. And at that point, it's anyone's guess how high the price will move in US dollars. But the price of gold is already breaking out in several currencies other than the dollar. So Dave Kranzler, he hit it on the head. So maybe you all should take a look at his website, Investment Research Dynamics. Another guy who hit it on the head, and I'll go ahead and roll his clip for you. Hang on, let me clear a few windows up. Another guy hit it on the head in his Bloomberg interview was Paul Tudor Jones, and I'll go ahead and play that clip for you.
Of the market, are you talking about across the board, or do you look at, cyclicals, defensives? What are?
So I'm a macro trader, and I'm really not trading sectoral that much. So for me, the simplest trades are, I think one of the best trades is going to be gold. If I had to pick my favorite for the next 12 to 24 months, it'd probably be gold.
Where does it go to? Beyond 1400?
Oh, I think if it goes to 1400, it goes to 1700 rather quickly. It has everything going for it in a world of rates that are conceivably going down in the United States and going to zero. It has everything going for us. Remember, we've had 75 years of expanding globalization and trade. It's been, and we've built the machine around the belief that that was the way the world was going to be. Now all of a sudden it's stopped and we're reversing that. And so when you do something like that, when you break something like that, a lot of times the consequences won't be seen at first. It might be seen 1 year, 2 years, 3 years later. So that would make one think that it's possible that we go into recession. It would make one think that rates in the United States go back towards the zero bound level. And of course, in that situation, gold's going to scream. And it'll be the antidote institutionally for people with equity portfolios.
And of course, commodity.
Okay, so gold will be the antidote for people with equity or heavily in equity. So we're going to see how this plays out. Getting to what's going on in the chat box. The rich are buying gold, banks, other countries get into precious metals, or middle class going to get hammered. Jackie, yes, middle class. If we want to avoid that anvil coming down on top of us, that hammer and anvil, both, we're going to get squeezed by both sides. We should be looking at gold and silver. We should be buying gold and silver at this point. Excuse me. I don't like Sprott anymore. Okay, we'll get to that in a bit. Um, okay, so let me go ahead and close that other window. But the thing is, gold does look to be on the move. It is rising a bit, and we recently saw Bitcoin hit 10,000, and I think a lot of us were waiting for the day where gold can hit 10,000. But our guest this past week, Brian Lenny, who's in the mining sector, he has a different opinion about gold reaching 10,000. Is it something that we really want? And this is what he had to say. Well, let's say price of gold hits $10,000 an ounce, and the world is exactly as it is today. Would you sell your gold, hold it, or buy more?
I'm sort of scared of contemplating a world where you have $10,000 gold. Because what does everything else cost? Because there has to be a check and balance for this. While the allure of high gold prices is very attractive to somebody who holds bullion or gold shares, ultimately I think there is that price to pay on the flip side. Really, in that scenario, it would be interesting to see if you could even sell the gold, because people need to have the money to buy it, and maybe in those cases, most people are using the money to buy groceries instead of a bar of gold. So it's a really interesting scenario, because I do think that if the price of gold is going to be $10,000, then the price of most everything else has to go up too. Yeah. So, in the end, I don't really enjoy thinking about a scenario where there's $10,000 gold, because it opens up a lot of questions that I don't really feel like I can effectively answer myself.
Okay, so the question from his assessment is it possible for $10,000 gold to exist in the world as we know it today? I'm curious to see what your views on that are. For myself, I will say that if gold reaches 10,000, we are not going to be liking what we're seeing. Bitcoin hit 10,000. Bitcoin almost hit 20,000. The world didn't change. If gold hits 10,000, the world is definitely going to be changing, and I don't think it's going to be for the better. But having said that, it surely does look like the gold price is going to go up a bit. Silver surely is going to follow, if not surpass gold percentage wise anyway, relative to gold. Some more of your comments. Eddie and Erica, get it and forget it. There's a reason why gold and silver have been money for 5,000 years. Silver will go to original ratio of 9 to 1. That's exactly what the miners are telling us. The ratio of silver to gold right now, coming out of the ground anyway, is 9 to 1. And so if it should be based against each other, we should be looking at the gold price divided by 9, and that should be the silver price, which is a far cry from where it is to today. Never sell unless you have to. Absolutely. Again, last week as we spoke, there are times where you may have to give some of it up, but we do have a peer-to-peer program for guys who do buy and store with us, where they can actually use their silver and gold as collateral to take out low interest loans. So in that sense, You don't have to sell it, you will still own it. Jackie Bridges, I agree. Gold and silver are real money, and no federal government will ever tell me any different. Agree with you there. Agree with you there, Jackie. Meta Silver, how you doing? Dr. Faber is a straight shooter. Oh, excuse me. Absolutely, he is a straight shooter. There's no denying that. But having said that, let's go ahead and take a look at what the silver price is right now and see what's going on with it and see what's going on with the ratio. So we're on our website, silverbullion.com.sg. We are celebrating 10 years. It's a pretty good job that the company has done. We're seeing silver just a little bit up, and at 1542, we're seeing gold at 1407, just a little bit up as well. Um, Again, these prices do understand they're updated every 3 to 5 minutes, so it may not be exactly the same price that you see. So that's the reason why there may be a bit of a difference. Um, Looking at the ratio, it's gone up 91.3, where it takes 91 ounces of silver to be the equivalent of 1 ounce of gold. Last Friday, it was really bouncing around between 89 and 90, 89, 90, and then finally it went a bit up to 91. Thing is, gold is moving for sure, but silver, it hasn't left the platform yet. So it's you still do have a chance to get on that silver train before it starts to move, where we see the ratio start to come down a bit. So I would suggest, if you haven't, if you feel you missed gold, it's getting out of reach, silver is still there for you. And you can use that ratio later on, where silver can be that vehicle to get yourself some gold. So not all is lost. And one interesting thing though, we always have guests that come on and they talk about um, using 10% of your portfolio to be allocated in gold and silver. And I know a lot of you guys probably are thinking, hey, Patrick, come on now. I have a mortgage to pay. I have kids to feed. Where am I going to get a portfolio where I can put 10%? Well, the thing is, you probably already do if you have a 401k, believe it or not. And you can use that 401k, use 10% of it if you want, roll it over and get a precious metals IRA. And I went ahead and got some of the companies for you. In fact, let me copy this link here and I'll post it in the chat for you guys. Paste it there. Okay, so this link, what it'll give you is a list of IRA custodians and administrators. And these are the guys you would like to contact. So we scroll down a bit and you can see a whole bunch of names here. We do talk to American IRA. We do talk to New Direction when we scroll down. These companies actually do have clients that store with us, meaning they have a precious metal IRA and they store the gold and silver with us outside the reach of the US government. So when you hear us talk about allocating 10% of your portfolio in precious metals, if you have a 401k, this is exactly what we're talking about, where you can get in touch with one of these companies and they can go ahead and help set you up where you can use part of your 401k, the 10%, like everyone says, to allocate in precious metals, and go ahead and roll that over and use it to buy precious metals. You don't need money in your wallet, in your savings account. I know you have a mortgage to pay, things like that. This is money that's already there that you have. So I hope you do go ahead and look into this. Um, so let me go ahead and get back to chat, see what you guys are talking about. Crooks at the Fed. Okay. Aliens are real and so is Bigfoot. Well, we'll see in time, won't we? Today might not be, but tomorrow's a different day, right? You never know. Harry Dent, the chief, Harry Dent, who's got a bit of a dent in his head, still sticking to his call of 700, going down to 400 for AU. I don't think it's going to go down to 400. Uh, Meta silver, yes, the U.S. dollar has to strengthen substantially for dents call to happen, and I don't think the U.S. dollar is going to strengthen that much. In fact, with what we're seeing from Powell, with what he's saying, and with what we're looking at as far as countries actually de-dollarizing, I do think the dollar is going to weaken and more than likely significantly weaken. So earlier, I had mentioned in the community group that we were going to be talking about this report from In Gold We Trust, and it just came out in May, just a few weeks ago, and I'm going to be taking a look. Well, gold in the age of eroding trust. I think that pretty much sums it up, right? We are in an age of eroding trust. So what I'm going to do is we'll take a look at one chapter in this free publication, which you guys can get. I'll put the link later where you can download this for free. But we're going to go ahead and take a look at de-dollarization. Europe joins the party. Okay, this is the other half of why the dollar is more than likely going to get in big trouble. It's not just QE, money printing, and things like that. It's also that companies are de-dollarizing, meaning they are moving away from the dollar. So as countries move away from the dollar, of course they're going to send it back home. They're not going to need it as much. And on the flip side, if we have QE where we're printing the dollar, I think some pretty huge days of hyperinflation are coming ahead. But nonetheless, this report was it was created out in Europe by Incrementum AG, I believe. I'll put the link up to them later. Some key takeaways: the U.S. aggressive policy under Donald Trump is undermining confidence. Europe has taken new U.S. sanctions against Iran as an opportunity to expand the euro's infrastructure, and gold plays an important role for central banks. In 2018, they added more gold to their reserves than in any year during the last 5 decades. So, again, things are happening. And just to give a little bit of a background, the US dollar system was founded at Bretton Woods on three pillars: the American military supremacy, financial hegemony, and economic prowess. And the US is now the world's largest debtor. Besides all of these things, the U.S. is the world's largest debtor. China has also a supreme military, financial, and economic power in expanding concentric circles. And we know Russia is carving out its own sphere of economic and military influence. And Europeans now use the euro. As American power continues to ebb, the dollar will become increasingly unable to rely on geopolitical support, meaning America's allies may not be there when it comes to supporting the dollar because, frankly speaking, they have their own currency. And why should they have to go ahead and buy dollars when they have their own currency that they can use? So it's pretty important. As an example, we had Omar al Bashir. Some of you may remember he was the president of Sudan for quite some time. He was overthrown by the military. And then before he was going to be extradited to Europe, but before he was extradited to Europe, they went ahead and opened up a suitcase that he had, and it wasn't full of clothes, it was full of bills. And these bills weren't green, they were purple and yellow, meaning this guy was running away and he didn't care to carry US dollars. He was carrying euros. So it kind of shows how people around the world they are seeing more value or equal value in other currencies than just the US dollar. So welcome to 2019. US dollar is no longer the only global currency, neither in the reserves of central banks, in payment transactions, in the energy market, or in the hiding places of criminals of the world. So again, as I said, people are seeing currencies being equal to the dollar at this point. Okay. So it was around the celebrations of the 20th anniversary of the euro that some of the big heads in the European Union they started to openly criticize the supremacy of US dollars as a reserve currency. But as we can see here, when you look at the breakdown of the currencies, 66% of currency reserves is US or are US dollars. But if you look here, 21% are euros, which means the euros are starting to take up a significant part of being significantly more as being a reserve currency. The US dollar, it does continue to enjoy the confidence of markets, governments, and central banks, but faith, that's the key word, faith in the dollar is weakening a little more year by year. And we're seeing Europe, China, Russia, and a lot of small countries that are setting initiatives every year to make themselves independent from the dollar. And because the dollar has been the global reserve currency for almost 100 years and is now used by a large number of players, there is a great incentive to use the dollar still again and again when conducting international business. But again, as mentioned, countries are slowly starting to move away from the dollar. And some of the reasons why they're moving away or going into de-dollarization, more and more countries are looking at alternatives to the US dollar for trading, accumulating reserves of non US dollar currencies, or purchasing gold. Major players such as China, Russia, and now Europe has joined in, are taking steps to undermine the US dollar system to establish alternative payment systems. A lot of politicians are, frankly speaking, getting tired of the US using a dollar as a weapon. uh, Even in U.S. mainstream, we're hearing more voices that the U.S. dollar is not going to remain a leading currency forever. And people who are really getting fed up with the dollar, the opponents of the U.S. dollar, they are saying that a lot of it had to do with the U.S. turning away from gold in 71, and they're looking at that as being a historical mistake. So these are a lot of reasons why people are starting or countries are starting to get away from the dollar. Let me jump into some questions. I don't want it to go unanswered. Uh, Spot Gold 1408. Okay, greetings from. Hey, how you doing? Pompeo, Bolton are criminals. They need to be fired. Well, we'll see how that goes. But getting back to this de-dollarization, as a chart showed you, the euro is now the second most used currency in the world, with 60 countries linking their currencies to the euro in one way or another. Uh, the euro currently allows, or sorry, euro currently accounts for 20% of global currency reserves, as again we saw in that chart. But here's the interesting thing: the EU imports oil and gas worth around 300 billion euro annually. Okay, it's a huge number. And 80% of these are still invoiced in US dollars today. And this, again, is the reason why countries are looking to get away from the US dollar to de dollarize. Juncker, meaning Jean Claude Juncker, I believe he's the head of the EU, he called the situation absurd. And I think if we look at it from the European perspective, yes, it's a bit absurd. In view that only 2% of the EU's energy imports come from the USA, yet 80% of these are still invoiced in US dollars. It's absolutely absurd that European companies buy European planes in dollars instead of euros. And from the European perspective, uh, I think most of us would agree that why would you have to switch currencies to buy something? Why can't you just go ahead and go ahead and buy it? I mean, think of like if you saw something on eBay and you wanted to buy it, first thing you got to do, but you can't use your dollars. You have to go and exchange your dollars to get, let's say, Japanese yen, if the yen were the reserve currency. You have to go and buy yen first. And then you can use your yen to buy that item on eBay. And then the seller, he takes that yen, but he has to convert it back into his own local currency. So I mean, you have to understand it's more than a headache for other countries to do this, and it's really starting to show. A lot is starting to crack right now. And the reason a lot of these guys are looking at, I mean, besides the historical context of it, but the trigger for Juncker's speech, again, head of the EU, and the subsequent steps by the EU Commission was because of the withdrawal from President Trump from the nuclear deal with Iran. So again, EU is basically getting fed up. This was a deal, according to them, that had been negotiated by his predecessor, Trump's predecessor, Obama and Kerry. But the thing is, it was more than just the U.S. dollar. It was about more than the dollar or Iran's nuclear program. China, Russia, and Europe had relied on Washington's promise to stop using the dollar as a weapon. So part of that agreement was for the U.S. to stop using the dollar as a weapon, and they were bitterly disappointed when Trump pulled back from the deal. Trump administration is increasingly using the dollar and access to the dollar clearing and financing as a geopolitical weapon, risking retaliation and perhaps even endangering the future of the dollar based global monetary system. Again, when this all started, it's hard to say because we've had the petrodollar for so long and countries have been fed up since then. So, but I do think things are starting to come to a head when they look at Trump. They're starting to feel even more uneasy and shading over into angry. So I think we're at that tipping point. Why Europe, China, and Russia are speeding up the process of de-dollarization can be understood only if the significance of the Iran deal is properly understood. Uh, Iran could become an important trading partner and energy supplier for Europe. The same applies to China, but Iran is above all a case study in what Washington can do to you if you expose yourself to the US dollar for better or for worse. Again, this goes back to EU has its own ambitions. Every country has its own ambitions, but they have to step into the realm of using the US dollar and they will be basically subject to US authority once they do go into the dollar. So it's a bit of a dilemma right now. Um, so let me scroll down a bit. Okay, Iran is a decisive factor. This was said in 1997 by Zbigniew Brzezinski. Probably pronounced his name wrong, but he said this back in 97. Potentially, the most dangerous scenario would be a grand coalition of China, Russia, and perhaps Iran. And this is something we're seeing. An anti hegemonic coalition united not by ideology, they don't care what each other thinks, but by complementary grievances. They don't care what each other thinks, but they all are getting upset with the US weaponizing the dollar. It would be reminiscent in scale and scope of the challenge posed by the Sino Soviet bloc, but this time around, China would likely be the leader and Russia would be the follower. Averting this contingency, however remote it may be, will require a display of US geostrategic skill on all perimeters of Eurasia simultaneously. And that's where the US is starting to crack the relationship with Europe. And I think when you look at this, we could rearrange his quote to be saying something like China, Russia, Iran, and Europe. And that's a pretty scary thought. So with these things going on, Europe is taking action, and this is the meat. This is really the meat of this article here, of this chapter. For the first time since the introduction of the euro, the idea of a separate payment agency, was put forward. Instex, INSTEX, is the agency. The abbreviation stands for Instrument in Support of Trade Exchanges. This is going to rival SWIFT, basically. Washington intervened again during the preparatory work. For example, it managed to prevent Instex from being established in a small neutral country such as Austria. In the end, though, Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, Germany and France, took things into their own hands. The agency will be based in Paris. So they scaled up a bit. They're going to challenge the US by not going so small. They're going to start using their bigger partners in the EU. The agency will be based in Paris. The German banker Per Fischer is going to be its first boss. An interesting detail: the third member of the alliance is Great Britain. Of all countries, which is currently leaving the EU, it seems that the rage over Donald Trump's actions is also wielding rivals together. The fact that China and Russia have promised Instec support should be no surprise. Again, I'm going to say this is a long time coming. I think to be pointing at Donald Trump is a bit unfair in this article, mainly because it really all stems from the petrodollar, as we're going to see. Um, we'll go down a bit. Let me get to the part of the where they do talk about the petrodollar. The global energy market sees an annual trading volume of around 40 trillion USD. More than 90% of this amount is accounted for by oil. And this trade has been conducted almost exclusively in US dollars for 50 years. So, again, this is what I'm saying. When the petrodollar came about, where every country had to start using US dollars, this was already the buildup. And we are just only seeing basically the tipping point with President Trump. Um, let's see. They are gradually destabilizing the monetary order that has prevailed since the 70s. Um, since this historic 1974 agreement, talking about the petrodollar between the US and Saudi Arabia, most of the energy trade has been dominated in US dollars. We know that. The largest buyer, the US, largest buyer of oil at that time, and the most important supplier of oil, Saudi dominated OPEC, at that time, the key word is at that time, agreed to trade in oil in dollars. However, the center of gravity has since shifted towards Europe and Asia, and the US has become the largest producer of oil, albeit so far remaining a lightweight in exports. Europe and China are by far the largest importers. And this brings a question: where is the petrodollar deal, frankly speaking, outdated? At that time, the US was the biggest importer, Saudi and OPEC the biggest exporter. It was made back in the 70s, mid 70s. Is the petrodollar being outdated? And is that part of the problem of why we are seeing de dollarization? Absolutely, it is. The US cannot afford to stay with the petrodollar with old players, excuse me, when new players have come to the stage. And that's the situation now where new players have come to the stage. And frankly speaking, again, why do they need to operate in US dollars? So let me take a look at some of the comments here. Uh, Mr. T, those silver and gold bugs know it's manipulated. Yeah, it is. I mean, I think we all know that, which is why when I do see people forecasting breakouts on charts, and I really shake my head at that, because when these guys look at the price of gold and silver, they're using charts. We know the price is manipulated. So my question to them is always, if the price is manipulated, you have bad data going in, you're forecasting on bad data, you're telling us there's a breakout on bad data, manipulated data. So I don't see the frankly speaking, I don't see the logic behind using manipulated prices to forecast manipulated prices. I don't know, is that what we're looking at? Hard to For me, it's hard to understand those guys. I don't look at prices and try to form trend lines and look at head and shoulder patterns, and it doesn't make sense to me because the price is manipulated. Why am I going to listen to someone telling me it's a breakout when they're referring to manipulated prices? But anyway, getting back to this de-dollarization, uh, of course, there's no love from Moscow. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, what he had to say is that he firmly believes that the misuse of the role of the US dollar as an international currency will ultimately undermine its role. And he does make a good point there. Uh, we are not ditching the dollar is ditching us. The instability of dollar payments is creating a desire for many global economies to find alternative reserve currencies and create cross settlement systems independent of the dollar. We're not the only ones doing this, believe me. And he goes on to say, in fact, that Russia has sold some of their S-400 missile systems uh, to Turkey, a NATO state. So you need to kind of shake your head at that and wonder what's going on. Of course, it was under fierce protest by Washington, and Russia has also sold weapon systems to India as well. So the question is really, should U.S. allies be buying arms from adversaries? And again, it goes to show how, the world is, where we're trying to have globalization where everything is one. We are also seeing countries starting to show a bit of sovereignty at the same time, which is why globalism, in a sense, is not really working. It does look like it's going to scale back, perhaps to regionalization, where certain areas of the world become the producers of certain items. Don't know. Maybe there'll be certain currencies floating around in certain regions of the world. Possibly. Don't know. But the point is, countries want to get away from the US dollar because US seems to be weaponizing their dollars. And frankly speaking, at times we do. Russia is selling off US treasuries. Um, and we're looking at this chart here. We do see that Russia, this blue line, they really, it's just like a waterfall. They just really sold it off. But they do need to keep some. China, on the other hand, which is the top line, they have sold off, but it does look like, it is a gradual decrease. But in the summer of 2018, the Russian central bank had already reduced the share of the US dollar in its reserves to 24%. And that's kind of what we're seeing right here, this little waterfall just dropping off the cliff, basically. Uh, Russia exports about 600 billion USD worth of energy per year. Despite Putin's efforts, three-quarters of this amount is still being settled in US dollars. And that's the reason why Russia still needs to hang on to some of these dollars. Putin cannot therefore simply throw away the US dollar reserves onto the market. Russia also needs the global reserve currency to participate in global trade. In other words, Russia can push ahead with its own de-dollarization only if the rest of the world participates, and especially in the energy sector. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now, where Europe is creating their index to handle payments. China, Russia, they're doing their own thing bilaterally, and they're trying to include Iran into the fold. The Russian economy remains heavily dependent on commodities, which are typically traded in dollars. Nearly 70% of its exports are processed in the currency, although the share of the ruble and won denominated transactions has been growing. So this is what we just mentioned. Finance Ministry reckons three-quarters of bilateral trade with China still rides the greenback. Ending the dollar's dominance is not so easy. So again, even though they are de-dollarizing, it's not entirely that easy to get away completely from the US dollar. And while Russia, China, Europe, and other countries increasingly rely on their own currencies and gold, Putin, Vladimir Putin, does warn Donald Trump that regarding our American partners placing limitations, including those on dollar transactions, I believe is a big mistake. By doing so, they are undermining the trust in the US dollar as a reserve currency. Putin, I think, he's speaking some truth here, and he's saying some things that the US should have an ear to. Uh, there is criticism of the petrodollar deal, which again probably is at the heart of it all. It's just that things are getting to a tipping point right now. Um, U.S. President Richard Nixon broke gold's link. We know that with the U.S. dollar. Most of us we do already know this, but he did it without first asking the European partners for their opinion. And again, I think this still does burn Europe a bit today, where the U.S. is really just going to act on its own, and everyone else is going to get affected. And when you look at an older culture, civilization, a more historical place, when the younger guy is telling the older guy what to do, meaning America, the younger guy basically telling Europe, the older guy, what to do. Of course, it's not going to sit well. So there's some things we do need to understand the rest of the world's perspective. The dominant position of the US dollar was cemented for decades, and Washington still has an allergic reaction whenever the power blocks, such as Europe, Russia, or China, interfere in energy trading or even want to use their own currencies. And we know this is true, and it ties back into the petrodollar, which was made at a time when the US was the largest importer, Saudi and OPEC largest exporter. But there are new players on the stage right now. And this is why we're having, I believe, why we're having this big issue about dollar or de-dollarization. Um, but for decades, the petrodollar deal, it was hardly known to the public. When you heard the word petrodollar, you were thinking conspiracy, right? When you heard the word petrodollar, you were probably thinking this guy, right? Petrodollar, we were all thinking this guy. Okay. But nonetheless, the goal of the petrodollar was to neutralize crude oil as an economic weapon and find a way to persuade a hostile kingdom to finance America's widening deficit with its newfound petrodollar wealth. And according to Parsky, Nixon made clear there was simply no coming back empty handed. Failure would not only jeopardize America's financial health, but could also give the Soviet Union an opening to make further inroads to the Arab world. And that's a big deal because when you look at that, I think we have to say that the US was already weaponizing oil and the dollar back then at the creation of the petrodollars. And again, this is probably at the heart of it, why countries are really de-dollarizing. It's just getting a bit much now, especially again with Trump is weaponizing the dollar, and that is the truth of the matter as well. But I do believe Trump is just at the tip of it, but behind it all, it's the petrodollar. The European Union is set to unveil plans for challenging the dollar's dominance in global markets, including energy, as it seeks to strengthen the international role of its currency and become more independent from the US. And we're going to get into another interesting part here where Europe has not forgotten the past. It has been working for 50 years on a future in which alternatives to the US dollar can be found. One of those alternatives is the euro, the other one is gold. Here we are, back to the barbarous relic, right? Of course not. The euro system holds around 11,000 tons of gold in reserves, almost 3,000 tons more than the US officially owns. Now that's key. Remember that the euro system, meaning all of Europe, it's not just country by country where the US leads the world as far as gold holdings. If you account all of Europe as one unit, one system, they hold more gold than the US. And that's important now. Okay, we're going to scroll down. I'll tell you why. Gold is still significant. I ask myself, if gold is a relic of a long history, why is 1 trillion worth of gold held by central banks worldwide, plus the IMF and other financial institutions? If it's worthless and meaningless, why does everyone still own it? Alan Greenspan, 2018. In 2018 alone, central banks bought 651 tons of gold. This figure corresponds to an increase of 74% over the previous year. Bloomberg framed the situation by saying central banks are ditching the dollar for gold. Okay, wait a minute now. We have countries ditching the dollar in favor of other currencies. We have central banks ditching the dollar in favor of gold. We have Jay Powell coming out saying it looks like interest rates are going to have to be lowered. Maybe we're going to go into QE. A lot of things are coming to a head here, but central banks ditching the dollar for gold. Let me continue with this. First quarter gold purchases by central banks led by Russia and China were the highest in 6 years. As countries diversify their assets away from US dollars, global gold reserves rose 145.5 tons in the first quarter, 68% increase from a year earlier. The World Gold Council said Thursday in a report, or, well, Thursday back then. Russia remains the largest buyer as the nation reduces its U.S. Treasury holdings as part of a de-dollarization drive. So when we look at this, we are seeing gold holdings of central banks in tons since 2008 always been going up, and they're going to continue to go up. Central banks are de-dollarizing as well. Confidence in U.S. dollar is waning. You also have to ask yourself why the central banks are such hard-working gold buyers. Again, de-dollarization. We've already shown more and more countries are slowly losing confidence in the current US dollar denominated system. Gold, which many central banks now include in their balance sheets at market value, offers an alternative. So we're back at gold. Everybody's saying, gold is a barbarous relic, but here we have central banks saying it's the alternative to the US dollar. It is indeed the only true natural or neutral asset available to governments and central banks. It's the only neutral asset. Around a third of the world's gold holdings are held in the vaults of central banks. Don't keep your gold in a bank. Okay. It's just my personal advice. But getting back to what I mentioned about the US being the top country having the most gold if you go country by country. But if you take a look at this chart here, the euro area has more gold than the US. So when we talk about the euro and Instex and creating an alternative dollar system, and they hold the most gold over the US, and if they combine with Russia, another 2,000, and they combine with China, another 2,000. We know China's got more than that, another 2,000 tons. These countries have far more gold than the US. And if they should combine and join up, the US, for lack of a better term, is going to start to be getting financially castrated at this point, even with the gold that they hold, if they do hold the gold. This is pretty big. I mean, we need to understand this. Europe is already developing that Instex system. These countries, they all are agreeing to get off the dollar. Combined, they have a lot more gold than the US has. And central banks are also buying the gold. I think, again, the US dollar is in big trouble more than we know, more than we'd like to know. Um, Let me go down a bit. Uh, For the very first time, U.S. mainstream is openly talking about the likelihood that the U.S. dollar may one day no longer be the sole reserve currency. We know this. We know this, guys, and it's the reason why we are buying gold and silver. We're doing exactly what the central banks are doing. We cannot create our own euro. We cannot create our own won. We cannot create our own yen, but we can create our own money by being our own central bank and getting gold and silver. The major players on Wall Street have also become aware of this issue, meaning de-dollarization, after Russia began selling U.S. government bonds at the end of 2018. Russian central bank has sold at least 85 billion US dollars, or 150 billion, should say, in dollar assets, according to Goldman analyst Zach Pandel. We go down a bit more. Larry Fink, the founder and CEO of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, is saying that a dispute with China could not be a good idea against this backdrop because Beijing is sitting on the largest holdings of US government bonds. Generally, when you fight with your banker, it's not a good outcome. I wouldn't recommend you fight with your lender, and we're fighting with our lenders. 40% of US deficit is funded by external factors. No other country has that. So not only are we driving people away from the US dollar, we're basically telling them or giving them a hard time where they may not even want our business anymore, meaning the buying of treasuries and whatnot. So, in conclusion, I'll look back into the past with its changing empire that have risen and fallen, and you can also predict the future. The reserve currency is always also a safe haven for investors, and the US still has not lost confidence of the markets despite all the actions of Donald Trump. The US dollar markets are still by far the largest and most important of the world. Um, Only the next major crisis will show whether the euro, the won, or gold will really be able to do any harm to the leading currency status of the dollar, or whether the US dollar still has enough left in it to prevail. Until then, the creeping loss of confidence in the dominant currency of the past 7 decades is likely to continue. The erosion of trust in the US and its dollar means that the central banks will continue to buy gold on a regular basis. And I'm going to wrap up that report there. So I'm curious, what have you guys been thinking when you're hearing all of these things of how the dollar is it's really getting squeezed on all ends. As mentioned, interest rates look like they're going to drop. Printing looks like it's going to happen again. QE, uh, zero interest rates, negative interest rates. Who knows? Central banks are buying up gold. Just had Basel III, where gold is now a tier one asset. We're seeing countries starting to de-dollarize, move away, and we're seeing Europe helping it all happen. Dollars days are not, they're not permanent. It is going to go at one day. And as we mentioned, this is where you need to be your own central bank and be getting yourself some silver and gold. Dave Nowitzki, ultimately, I think the governments can get your coins, Bitcoin and gold and silver. Um, that's pretty interesting. It's debatable. One thing I tell guys with Bitcoin, okay, besides I love you, okay, even even though I'm a gold guy, okay, Bitcoin. Here's the thing, if things really do get bad in that $10,000 gold scenario, things really get bad. If you have a Bitcoin app on your wallet, sorry, if you have a wallet, Bitcoin app on your phone, change maybe change the icon or something. And I say that because if things do go bad, you can imagine people are going to be basically acquiring things from one another. And one of those things, with all certainty, is going to be your mobile phone. And if they take your mobile phone and they ask you, open it up, and they go ahead and search through it and they see you have a crypto wallet, they know that, you basically they know you're trading or you're holding Bitcoin, and they're going to take it from you. So if you do have, Bitcoin app in that scenario or wallet on your phone, you know, do consider changing the icon or something. So, maybe change it to grandma's photo or something like that. So they won't be interested in looking at what that app has. Uh, People just need to wake up to that fact. All fiat is trash. Yeah, I think Robert Kiyosaki made that phrase. Cash is trash, and dollar does look like it's going to be headed for some rough times ahead. Uh, Still won't trust it. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. Period. Again, Timothy, I'm going to have to disagree with that. There was one interview we had with Dave Drummond from Georgetown Trust. He does handle IRAs. He made a point to say, have some gold and silver in hand, have some gold and silver, in car's reach, or have some gold and silver within reach, in car's reach, and some out of reach, meaning where not even the government can get to it. And I think that's a pretty good point. I used to think, there's no way I would let any gold and silver go out of the country, store it somewhere else in a different country, this, that. But you got to ask yourself, is the US closer to peace and stability? Okay. Or is the US closer to chaos and possibly doing things like confiscation. So you have to ask yourself, on this needle of peace and stability or a bit of chaos, if that needle in your perspective is pointing more towards the chaos, I would be looking at holding some of that gold and silver out of the country. And I say that because you do need some with you for sure. Get through day to day, let's say if things get really bad. But the thing is, it is there to be or to serve as a wealth protection vehicle for you. And I'm not so sure if you would want to have all your wealth protection assets all in one place. And we hear people say diversify your assets. And then if you hear closer, the next sentence usually they say diversify the location of your assets. And for me, that makes sense. I mean, not everybody, of course, is going to agree to that. But for myself, I strongly feel, keep what I need, but the rest I might want to be looking at keeping it outside of the US in a country that's more stable. And if I use that gauge again, where I'm at, Singapore, is Singapore closer to peace and stability, or is Singapore closer to chaos like the US? On that needle, it is pinned against peace and stability. So when I look at that, I see one country, peace and stability. I see another country, chaos. What do? Right? You need to take care of your assets that are in the chaos zone and have them be in a peace and stable zone. And again, because this is your wealth transfer vehicle, you need to have it there for you. But that's just my opinion. Um, okay, he was talking about crypto. Who's talking about crypto? Okay, so I went through all of that for nothing, huh? No. You may feel currency is trash, but you still have to use it. Absolutely. Will you enjoy life if the bottom drops out catastrophically? That's a thing. That's the thing. What even Brian Lenny just spoke about, which I played a little bit earlier for you. But the thing also what Brian Lenny had to say was you know we do these things when we look at de-dollarization. We buy gold and silver. We do it as an insurance, and this is something even Brian had to say, and I'll go ahead and show that for you. What led you to conclude that gold is not only an insurance policy but a must-have insurance policy?
So ultimately, I own gold as an insurance policy against the debasement of paper dollars, which I think at some point in the future, there's going to be a major event. What that event looks like in the end, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm confident that holding gold is going to protect at least a portion of my wealth. I think the late Richard Russell said it best. He said, "In the next crisis, it isn't who makes the most, but who loses the least."
Okay, so do we see gold as an investment or an insurance? I'll start off by saying for me, I've always seen it as an insurance, but an insurance that also has the potential to be an investment. Um, let's see. Back to the questions. USA won't do confiscations because the American people won't put up with it because it's too much search and seizure. All 320 million people. Um, that's hard to say. Yes, they cannot search and seizure 320 million people, but you never know what the government is going to think. And again, my opinion on this is, if I am buying gold and silver as uh, to help me out in case of some type of fiat event, that's half of it. The other half of it is I need to also protect what I'm going to use for wealth protection from the government. So we can't just only look at a fiat event. We also have to look at the government. And I think, as Giant Bandari pointed out, U.S. is headed in a socialist direction. And once Trump is finished with his term, um, I don't see the U.S. Being able to avoid heading into a socialist or even fascist direction. So again, if you're getting gold and silver because you think there may be a fiat event, do consider also a government event. And I'll leave it at that. I mean, I'm not here to convince anybody to keep it out of the U.S. or some out of the U.S. That's up to you. Everybody has different personal opinions, personal needs, personal plans. I'm just sharing with you my plan. Hong Kong is be converted into a Chinese city. Not yet, not yet, David. But hey, you can't deny it. You know, if you're China, you're gonna want Hong Kong at some point, and you're gonna go ahead and take it. So I I can't disagree with you there. Hong Kong, you know, it's such a small place. It has a special status, but you have to imagine China is just waiting to pounce. But let's hope Hong Kong can really hold its ground. Um, Richard, I have all my gold in my pocket, 2 total ounces. Hey, that's good. You have gold. That's very good. Uh, Singapore is more than 50%. And so tell me, Dave, what does that have to do with it? If you talk to Singaporeans, they will tell you they are very different from mainland Chinese, and I'd have to agree. Uh, Dave, we're borderline getting racist here, buddy. So yeah, be careful. I would not classify the Chinese in Singapore as to be Chinese um, PRCs, People's Republic of China, Chinese. The mentality, cultures, it's already different. It's two different things. Um, Timothy, Matt, we might head into a civil war because of high tensions. Not Tim, yeah, I agree. Um, we definitely could be headed into civil war. Hate to say it, but it's true. Uh, David, but this is what most people don't understand. It, unless you live in Singapore for quite some time and you live in China for quite some time, I promise you, you will see the difference. You will see a difference. Taiwan will choose to, man, yeah, that's why they had a few million people out in the street marching, Dave. Come on, you're really losing it. In fact, I think I'm not even gonna voice my opinion to what you have to say anymore. Uh, the chief, don't keep your gold or silver in Hong Kong. You know what? That is true. I mean, we just saw what happened, and I can tell you that we do have people from Hong Kong who are starting to ask a lot of questions. Uh, Equitable Apple. If the U.S. tries to outlaw gold, it would send the price even higher. Please do, government. Well, again, we don't know how that scenario is going to be when gold rises. But like I say, Bitcoin hit 10,000. The world's still the same. Bitcoin hit almost 20,000. The world's almost the same. But if gold hits that target or that amount, the world is not going to be the same. So, in a sense, that kind of tells you what people perhaps do value more, or maybe what is even real money. So, okay, I'll let you guys argue on that one. Um, Shane, I guess if China pushes too hard in Hong Kong, all the money talent will move to Singapore. That's exactly what's happening, Shane. Again, like I say, we have people from Hong Kong. A lot of them have been inquiring, and they see the safety with Singapore. And one thing with Singapore, a lot of people don't know, when a man turns 18, he's required to go into national service, I believe, for 2 years. So what that means is every Singaporean male, all the way up until in their 40s, I believe, um, they are attached to the military. They go into NS when they're 18, national service. They'll be in either Navy, Air Force, whatever it may be, Army. Um, and the thing is, they do their thing. And when they come out, they are on, in the U.S., what we would call something like reserve or National Guard status, where they still have to train, but less frequently. And the thing is, if anything does happen, Singapore has a huge amount of people that they can call up to go into service. And that's one thing that a lot of people didn't really know about Singapore when they say it's a small country, it can be overrun. I think Singapore probably has the biggest military in Southeast Asia, if not the most advanced. So they can very well defend themselves if anything should ever come to play. And So it's a point to consider that a lot of people did not know about. The world is on the verge of civil war. Maybe. I hope not. Thumbs up. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate it. Timothy Mack, we are not on the verge of world war because that is not what we average American wants, and Trump knows it. World war is what the cabal wants. And that's it's a good point. I mean, I think before the words like cabal were, kind of they weren't taken or accepted too easily, but I think words like cabal, words like deep state, they are becoming more and more accepted, and people do understand that there are forces or players at work that we just don't know about. And I'll use one example: the IMF. When it comes to the IMF, yes, we know who's there. We see them. But the thing is, I never voted for anyone in the IMF. And I'm sure none of you voted for anyone in the IMF. But yet they are setting monetary policy for the world. And so you have to ask yourself, if this group of people which are unelected, I didn't vote for them, you didn't vote for them, if they're setting monetary policy for the rest of the world, and they're telling governments or suggesting to governments what they need to do, then in a sense, you have your country here, and then you have the IMF here on top of it, or at least equal to or on top of it. So you have to ask yourself, who is actually the head? I mean, we know who the head of the IMF is, but who's the IMF serving? It's not serving us. We never voted for them. So they can't serve us, and they're not going to be accountable to us. They are going to be accountable to someone else. So who is that? As you mentioned, is it the cabal, as Timothy Mack mentions? Hey, maybe you can't put anything across anything nowadays. You just don't know. Um, Shane, I used to live in Seletar Camp. I used to watch the new inductees struggle to run in formation in the heat. Hey, you know what? Yeah, it's hot here. I remember in my Air Force basics, it was my first time to out of Hawaii when I was in Lackland, Texas. And I tell you what, I caught pneumonia. Um, it was too cold for me. And we got up in the mornings. Of course, you get up in the mornings, you do your run. It was way too cold for me. And I tell you, weather, especially when you just coming into to being a recruit, if you didn't properly train, or if you just had no chance to acclimate to weather, where like in my case, I had no chance to acclimate to that cold weather in Texas early in the mornings. The guys in Singapore, it is hot, and just running in running attire, it is hot. So I mean, it's not ideal, but it's the weather, it's the climate, and you train in it. So Shane, I didn't know you lived in Singapore. Let's see what else. The BIS and IMF and central banks, meaning cabal, probably. I mean, who knows? But the thing is, they are not serving us. They are serving someone else. They can't be serving us because we did not put them in power. How can they serve us? They're serving someone else. Um, it reminds me of I don't know if you guys saw that movie Rollover, but it's pretty intense where things started happening and collapsing all around him, and it was an intense scene, and I hope it's not something that we're going to go through. But I am interested to know what all of you folks had to say about sorry about that. Let me put the chat on about the dollar, the de-dollarization. I mean, I think that's a really huge thing now that Europe is creating that index where they can bypass the SWIFT system. So we're going to see how that plays out. Two kings, three queens. Exactly. No government or any of these so-called world leaders serve their constituents. You know what? I agree. We're seeing that more and more now. Trump does not have the luxury of giving a damn when what the average American wants. Yeah, I mean, I'll just say it. You have to wonder, whether alien, illegal alien, whatever the thing is, you elected people to take care of you, not to take care of people from other countries. That's the UN's job, if anything, not democratically elected leaders from a sovereign nation. If anything, that's the UN's job as far as the migration crisis. So I'll leave it at that though. Um, Nobody in America voted for people like John Bolton or Bernie. That is true. We did not vote for them, but the connection there is we did vote for Trump, who Bolton now works for. So again, it comes down to when you vote for someone, you also have to consider who they might put in. To be honest, I never thought he'd put in Bolton. Bolton, I've always thought of him as a war hungry guy. That mustache just it's got him all wound up. I don't know what else to say about Bolton, but and I'm gonna be wrapping this up soon. I appreciate you guys being here. We're over an hour already, hour 15. I know it's getting late wherever you guys might be. You guys need to get to bed, right? Get ready for work tomorrow. Um, so one last time, I'll go ahead and take a look at that gold and silver price and see where we're at. See if it's moving a bit in our favor or not. Okay. Oh, silver 2 cents up, gold $7 up. Okay, so kind of finding a little bit of stability there, but that's what they are. They're safe haven assets, right? So you expect some stability there. Excuse me. So you guys, you take care of yourselves, and we'll be back later this week. We're going to have Keith Weiner. This guy's super interesting. We're going to have Keith Weiner, the CEO of Monetary Metals, and I'll play just a really quick clip of what Keith had to say.
Raise your hand if you own gold, some gold, any amount of gold, just raise your hand. So gold is unique, and there's vast hordes. People have been hiding gold from the government and from their neighbors for at least 5,000 years.
What do we make of this?
I could tell you, but then it would kill you.
Keith Weiner, he's going to tell us a lot of things, and hopefully he's not going to kill us like he told me. No, but he's a very interesting guy. I think you guys will enjoy his interview. So I do wish you guys good night. You guys take care of each other, and I'm going to coin a new phrase here. We hear that term saddle up, as we get ready for what's ahead. So I'm going to say saddle up, and not only saddle up, silver up. Get ready for what's coming ahead. You guys take care, and I'll see you again next week. Take care, everyone.